Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts Nat and Kristen as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Do you think you're a leader? This topic today, welcome everyone. This topic today came out of a graduation session of our pilot program, Power Sessions. And one of our incredible participants there said, I just had this self-limiting belief that I was not a leader. So I had to do a couple things to recognize that indeed I am a leader. So we thought, what a great podcast topic.
I like it because it's not that's not uncommon for us, is it? That's one of the things in our pilot that came through a lot, that the number of people who tuned up at the start of the day who said, I don't know if I should be here. And it's still one of the biggest barriers to our membership network. People saying, am I senior enough? Do I need to be a people leader to be a leader? There's all sorts of misconceptions about what being a leader is. Quite rightly. I see why.
Yeah, I see why too. And we're going to share why and then what to do about it.
Okay.
Other than join the community.
We've had 4 days off and we are energetic.
Yeah, exactly. Well, shall we start with the whys?
Yeah.
Or shall we start with what is a leader?
Let's start with what is a leader.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. I was thinking about this morning and I have an example. And because you read all these silly definitions online when you're like, what is a leader? And they're quite mixed, and it's either leading people or you have to have, purpose and vision. And I'm like, kind of not. When I boiled it down and thought about it for me personally, would love to hear your thoughts, it's someone who can organize around a mission and influence people to get stuff done.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at its most default level, a leader is someone that people follow.
Yeah.
That literally you cannot be a leader unless people follow you. So however that works, whatever it is that makes people want to follow you, and that could be any number of triggers, that's what makes you a leader.
And I feel like the internet has defaulted to these ideas of Muhammad Gandhi and all of these leaders that have charisma or this massive vision and change the world and need to draw thousands of followers, or it's those that have charisma and are attracting major followers, but those are cult leaders too. Just saying. But I kind of think it's actually the everyday people that understand a mission and are really using influence to inspire people to get it done with them.
I agree. And I think because we're writing our newsletter on this week too, it's sometimes those examples of really famous leaders can almost be off-putting, because you look at the Oprahs of the world and the Obamas, both Obamas, and think they are such exceptional people, often who've overcome incredible odds to get where they've got, that they're unrelatable. Whereas I really like it. Our community manager actually told me this years ago, that idea of watching The Apprentice, which I don't know if anyone wants to watch anymore, but the task she got given during a course was watch The Apprentice and identify the leader in every episode. And she said in each of those episodes, and often at work, you'll see it at work too, someone is nominated as a leader. There is the project leader or the people leader. But what they were told to do is, instead of looking at who got the job title, look at who was influencing everyone. Look at who everyone was following. And you actually, when you think about it like that, you start to see it everywhere. And we've had it before where someone's left a company and you actually see a bunch of people leave straight afterwards because they followed that person.
Yes.
And that person didn't necessarily lead them officially or didn't have the job title, but they are the person that people look to and want to do what they're doing.
And I think that's a really important point. You don't have to have formal authority or power over people. And when I say that, you might not be their line managers. You might not actually formally lead a team, but you are trying to get something done in your capacity as, I don't know, it could be project manager. It could be managing the delivery of something. It could be developing a new practice or policy at your office, and you need input from a lot of people. It takes more than just one person to deliver something. It crosses, I'm sure, all sorts of business units and stakeholders, and that I think that's really important to underline, that you will have to influence people as part of that. you understand the mission of what needs to get done. You need to, I suppose, promote it and stress the importance of it and sell the importance of it by having impact on these stakeholders and the importance of it. And you have to communicate, and you need to bring people along the journey, and all of these various ways of influencing people to support, to endorse, to contribute to help you deliver. But it does not take formal authority over those people.
No, and I think the other really key part there is you can do it in all sorts of different ways. And I was just reflecting on what you said about leaders are painted out to be sort of visionaries. We probably all know a bunch of people who are incredible ideas people, or people who have thought of these incredible things, who aren't leaders because no one's following them on their thing. Like they have these great ideas, and you see it with business all the time, these brilliant ideas that never go anywhere, because being a visionary is very different from being a leader. And being a leader can be done in multiple ways. Like, I think you and I probably default to standing up and inspiring people and going, this is what we want to do, get in behind it. My girlfriend is probably in some ways the exact opposite. She really quietly sits and absorbs information and really figures it all out, and then quietly goes about making little decisions and little actions that start to build influence.
Yes.
And then before you know it, everywhere I've seen her work, people start to look to her and go, what would you say? And she's never stood up in front of everyone. She's never made a song and dance, but she just very quickly becomes known as someone who knows what they're doing, and then people want to follow that. And I think those are two great examples of how leadership can look very, very different, and both of them can work quite well.
Yeah, and I love that she's being authentic to her leadership style, which is quietly, getting her point across, making recommendations, having smart decisions. She's probably a thinker. That might be one of her strengths, able to connect the dots, and just quietly goes about it. And when things start to work, people kind of go, oh, this is a new and interesting way of working and delivering things.
Yeah. And there's a whole different, I mean, if we look at every single one of our friends, they probably all have quite a different style, and all of them can be really successful.
Yeah, well, I would say that my style as a child would have been painted as bossy, so I think that's something for a lot of
bossy.
I remember
banned
that
word.
and as a lot of women, it would have been painted as bossy, because I didn't mind taking charge in a situation. And so that effectively we have all these negative connotations with leading, and for women that is just one of them. So that would have been my style.
I think a lot of young people have that style, because before you hone your skills, if you know what you want to happen, you don't have the finesse to bring people along. You just demand it.
Yes. Well, that would have been my way of bringing it along, I suppose. But I do have a memory of an interview, and I might just share it quickly. And this was, now that I look back, I thought I was like this nothing uni student. I had no power, no influence, but in a high pressure situation, which was an interview, which I'll share with you in a minute, I had to display leadership skills, and I ended up getting the job. So it was for Coca-Cola, and they were choosing 2 representatives for each province in Canada. So I think we have 13 provinces in Canada, sorry, Canadians, plus 14, probably Nunavut, but which is territories. Oh my gosh, I probably have this wrong.
We have some territories and provinces in Canada, so they were to be counted.
Yeah, so let's say there were maximum 30 people that were hired by Coca-Cola to represent Coca-Cola that summer at a number of events and doing all sorts of things. And
were you dressed as like Santa Claus on a boat? Like, what do you do representing Coca-Cola?
You're selling the dream of Coca-Cola. It's brand awareness. Brand awareness. You show up at all the events all over.
Like
I traveled
summer festivals and
stuff.
stuff.
I lived in a van.
Kristen is a festy gal.
I lived in a van for the entire summer. And we did this thing. It was actually really neat. So anyway, they flew hundreds of people out to...
Did you wear red every day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They flew hundreds of people out to Toronto as part of this interview, those that got narrowed down. I was barely 19, maybe 18. I have no idea. And they put us through one-on-one interviews, 3-on-1 interviews, group interviews. And then it came down to the last, I don't know, let's say 50. And they needed to get down to 30. And so what they did, this is so weird in retrospect, they put us in a room and they gave us a scenario, but we weren't allowed to look at the scenario until we were in this room. So imagine 50 people in a room behind a glass pane with all of these Coca-Cola executives sitting on the other side of the glass pane. It was real high pressure. And we've been flown to Toronto to do this thing, right? At the big Coca-Cola place. So we flip it over.
There's so many orange flags in this situation for me. I'm like a bunch of, I presume, old white men watching a bunch of young, I presume, women competing to get to represent.
Okay, so we flip the scenario over. And we've been in a plane crash, and we are the survivors of a plane crash, and we need to figure out how to survive and get ourselves out of there.
Kristen killed everyone at 8.
I didn't need to resort to that, but I can't remember all the details. Memory fails me. But what I do recall, it was pandemonium, and everyone was going in every direction. And I remember just going, we're not going to get anything done. So I engaged my historically labeled bossy gene. And I was like, yo, we need to organize. And the first thing we need to do is to figure out how to survive. Because everyone was like, oh, let's go figure out how to escape and all this stuff. And I was like, days in the desert, we're going to all die from dehydration. We need emergent, And so I knew, some random reason I remembered, salt. Like, if you have salt, you can survive. Please don't ask me why. There was something related to salt I remember from science class. So I was like, we've got salt. Like,
everyone's madly Googling why salt.
There was no Google back then.
Now they are.
Oh, now they are.
Listening to this. They're like, is Kristen giving us survival tips, or is she trying to kill us all?
Let me tell you what, I don't remember how the rest of it went, but I remember by the end of that scenario, I had 50 people following me as we navigated survival packs and how to escape from that situation. And it was the smallest thing, but I gather on the other side of the panel, they were looking for the person who could engage, communicate, influence, blah, blah, blah. I got the job.
Well done. And then you lived in a van.
Yeah, I did. I'd lived in a van. But I didn't have any formal authority or power. I just was able to collectively communicate to these people, set priorities for them, and us get through this thing together.
And I think on top of all sorts of questions I have around Coke and your time there, I think one of the things that I really love about that story is that we often mistake leadership for a job title. And at PowerSuit, we're very much anti that. It's a state of being. And actually, true leadership, and the hardest version of leadership, is when you don't have the authority, when no one has given you the job title or the label that forces people to have to follow you. They choose to. And for anyone who isn't in an official leadership role, we often talk about how you can display leadership skills at every level. And that's a great example. You don't need to have it to be taken really seriously and to influence. And so give that hope. Have that as hope.
I agree. But you know what I'd love to add to that, because some people have influence as their strength and motivation. And so my top 4 strengths out of my 5, both in Clifton strengths and the high 5 test, which we often use, are in the influencing, motivating. So I would have found that situation quite easy. Now I happen to be coaching someone at the moment who has no formal authority over everyone and is really struggling to influence. She sent me the results of her test last week. No influencing or motivating strengths. And I'm like, this is an opportunity. It's a strength that may not come naturally to you right now. It's not something that you are currently flexing, but you need to. So I want to work with you to develop a plan on how to build those in, like, recognize the strength and try all sorts of experiments to put it into action and to build that strength.
And also, I would say, on top of building influence skills, because we often talk about playing to your strengths, and if that's not her strength, one of the things that I'm thinking even about some engineers, and one in particular we've worked with, who wasn't a big influencer. Like, that was not something I would think is in his strengths list. However, he was a leader because of other things. Like, he was very conscientious, he was incredibly deep thinker, and so would always go away and ponder the answer and come back with the right answer. So he actually, through just playing to his strengths, became influential because people knew he was the person to go to solve a challenge and complex things. And that, again, so I feel like
that's a really great challenge, and I'm going to take that on and have a look at before our next coaching session, just to see if there's anything she can flex in lieu of. I love that challenge.
Because I think, and influence, again, like influence in storytelling, great, that's one way, but there's probably a million ways you can influence.
Agreed.
And again, when it comes to leadership, all of these things can come into play, and it doesn't have to be done in the same way. So I really great example.
So let's talk about why. Like, why in the first place did we get into that situation where what I viewed as a fabulous woman leader doesn't see herself as a leader and had to go through a bit of an exercise to get there. What are some of the reasons why she might have got herself into that position?
There are so many. And I think one of the big ones for a lot of us, and we just talked a little bit about having some of those really famous examples can be a bit off-putting. For a lot of us, like if I look around me and have done my entire career, there are not a lot of examples of people who look and act like me, which makes it a lot harder to identify myself as a leader. And I think that can come down in any format, from not seeing women in general in leadership roles. We know we still only make up 10% of CEO positions, and a much smaller group of all executives are women. I think it's about 30% or something now.
Yeah.
So it's still only just becoming kind of common. I think if you make different life choices, like I think if you have children, for example, and you are the primary caregiver for a year or 2 or 5, you probably see fewer examples of people who look and act like you in those positions. And same goes in my boat, where I didn't have children, didn't get married. I was an outlier, and there were very few examples of people who made my life choices who were in those roles. So I think that lack of visibility does make it quite hard to identify, because I just think you end up sort of looking around going, well, you have to be an outlier to make it to that, or I'd have to sacrifice something, or it just doesn't cross your mind as much because it's not normalized.
Yeah, I picked up on a few threads there, and the first was obviously representation, is you can't be what you can't see, or it's much harder to if you don't identify as that. So I think thankfully that is changing, but I heard that's one of the whys.
And can I just dig into that a little bit more, because I was doing some research for our newsletter, and I just think this is a great example, because I think we can minimize that and just be like, but Simone Biles did it, and Oprah did it, and all these people who are outliers. And so it's very easy to counter that argument and sort of think, yeah, but how big a deal is it? And the example I started randomly Googling this morning that I think really makes that case is the 4-minute mile. And currently it's the 2-hour marathon, sub 2-hour marathon. It took probably almost 100 years of actively trying for one person to break the 4-minute mile. And this is across the world. There were so many people seriously trying to run a mile in under 4 minutes. Once the first person did it, within, I think it was 47 days it took for the next person to do it. And then within a year, 3 individuals got under 4 miles in the same race. Like, that's how quickly it spiraled into becoming kind of normal from almost 100 years of no one being able to do it. That mental barrier was so strong that it meant no one could do it until they could see it could be done. And I think, as much as it almost feels like a cliche these days to say you can't be what you can't see, because we know it's not true, you can, but those mental barriers are incredibly powerful. And so it is important to not underestimate the power of not having as many role models and not necessarily naturally linking women with leadership in how we see ourselves.
Yeah. Love that. Great example. And along with that is leaders that look like this or act like this, and all these biases and stereotypes of leadership and what a leader should be. And we do an exercise as part of our pilot program, Power Sessions, where we ask people to close their eyes and think about what a leader looks like. And thankfully, again, these things are shifting and changing, but probably up until ago, if you'd asked, it would have been all of these middle-aged men, would have been tall, would have been running a giant tech company, would have had led in quite an autocratic style. And that, again, is something that people, yes, okay, that's what a leader looks like, but then all of a sudden, like you said, you become the outlier. You're not like that, therefore, are you a leader? Like there's stereotypes and that go along with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even to this day, again, doing some research for the newsletter, Google top leaders, the first 9 results, literally the only visible results are all men.
Yeah.
And there's pictures of 9 men. And that stuff is really, it makes a difference when that's what you're seeing around you all the time. And then I think, I don't know if I'm just going to go and tackle this. We hear this a lot, that when people often say the worst leaders they've ever had are women. You've heard that a bit as well, right? We get that quite often from women. And I think sometimes if the examples of women leaders you've seen are people who have had to fight so hard to get into these positions and sacrifice so much that they almost themselves now have a bias about it should be this hard. It's like the parenting thing. you want life to be easier for your kids, but when it is, you kind of get annoyed by it.
Yeah.
And I think so if you've come up against a woman leader who's been an outlier and who's had to sacrifice and change and do all of this stuff, you may look at that and go, I don't want to be that person either. So I think there's and again, no judgment to them, because I just look at that and go, yeah, I get why you might end up feeling a little bit like you can't have it all because you've had to sacrifice so much, but it's not helpful for the next group underneath.
Well, and the great thing is that we don't necessarily need the top job to be the leader, and there is quite a bit of sacrifice involved in those top jobs, which then the internet basically points to those top jobs.
Yeah.
And in fact, I love these quiet moments of leadership where it's people like Kyla, your girlfriend, and people that are actually leading in quiet ways and every day basically delivering the productivity of nations by delivering fabulous innovations and projects and fantastic outcomes for society. And those are the leaders, the unsung heroes. But unfortunately, we just see the big top jobs.
That's
and
so
historically who've made those things. And there's leadership at all levels.
And in all situations.
Yeah.
Can I give you another example from this weekend?
Yeah.
So very sadly, one of Kyla's family had a significant health issue at a campsite way up north in New Zealand. It was quite an empty campsite, but there was a group there. So two of them there, one of them has sort of collapsed, I'll say. And the people around them fell into two groups. Everyone was in the first group, which was panic. There were all these people who were like, I've never dealt with this before.
Yeah.
How do I deal? Like literally having a panic attack in front of this woman who's trying to deal with the situation, who's actively involved. And then one other woman who immediately said, right, you're going to need to pack your toothbrush. You're going to need to pack an overnight clothes. You're going to need to get this stuff. Think about your medications. Think about his medications. And that's a situation where one leader emerged of this whole group of people who all had the potential and all could have taken it on. Only one of them amongst the chaos was like, here's how you're going to do it. That is not something you're going to ever get to the top Google result for, but that's leadership.
Yeah.
And you see it in all sorts of different scenarios. You have, and again, not loud, not a storyteller, just pragmatic advice, and took charge and got it done.
Getting shit done.
Yes.
Love it. Let's talk about some quick what you can do if you don't identify as a leader, because it is a self-limiting belief.
Oh, should we just go to the second reason I reckon for the why we don't see ourselves as leaders, which I think is the reinforcement of stereotypes. And again, the 9 results on Google saying being all men. We have talked a lot in tech about algorithms and how they reinforce biases. And there was that test. Do you remember doing that? It was like a Harvard test that we should try and link to it again, where it was correlations, and you had it would say like woman, leader.
Oh, yes.
And you'd quickly have to correlate the two, push a button. And even me, who like does this for a job, had a correlation between men and leadership and women and women at home. I think it was.
Wow.
Like, because it's just reinforced all around us. So we even have to grapple with it internally.
Yeah. Wow. And I think that's isn't that this whole bias training is actually just recognizing that you have them, and it just accepting we are shaped by society around us, by our upbringing, by lessons taught, and it's okay.
Yeah.
But recognizing it is often the first step in doing something about it.
And you think like watching TV, I was thinking, I always mention this, but things like Succession, The Apprentice, Suits, like I try and think of, what is it, Wolf of Wall Street? Like there's not a lot of examples of women in pop culture who are represented as strong, successful leaders. Like, so of course we have this bias because you look around and you just see it everywhere in a different way.
Yeah, agreed.
So yeah, I think that's the second one, is that we just have these stereotypes all around us that keep reinforcing it.
Love it.
We can't be what we can't see, but we also see a lot of examples of why we can't be it.
Yeah. Okay, well, hopefully that raises awareness. And isn't it funny when you start to notice these things a bit more when it's been introduced to you?
Yeah.
Amazing. Hopefully that is helpful. But the first action to combat that self-limiting belief of I'm not a leader, I don't see myself as a leader, is to gather evidence. And that's what this one power suitor did, was she sat down on a Friday. She looked back at every interaction of that week. And you can actually Google leadership behaviors, and some of them are cheesy, like vision and communication. And yes, okay, we need those things. But I actually think things like making decisions, decision making, and I guess communication is one of them. But there's some really common leadership behaviors that you may have in interactions that I love, because you'll be able to identify, and I'll link the article, you'll be able to identify yourself in all of these things. And these are leadership behaviors. So she sat down on a Friday afternoon and she went back through all of her meetings, all of her interactions. There might have been a couple sales engagements through that period, might have been a networking event. And she thought back of all the leadership behaviors that she had to employ or use in those interactions. And she could immediately see, oh, wait, I am a leader. So she was able to start to change the narrative in her head by collecting facts and evidence to combat that belief.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I think the other one there is how people relate to you. Like if people come to you with questions, if people come to you to help with solutions or for support or turn up to things, like the way people relate with you often will give you an indication as well that they see you as that. If we go back to the really fundamental definition of they follow you as a leader, that can help build the evidence of that as well. And just think about all the times that week someone came to you for advice, or came to you for a solution to their problem, or came to you for anything. That is leadership that they're asking of you.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. And then I just had these 3 questions. I don't know why I like them. I think it was part of these gathering evidence, but this is about if you just stop and kind of think, what initiatives, there's 3 things I'll just read out. What initiatives have you been involved in that you're really passionate about? You've probably stepped up and taken a lead role because you are passionate about it. So start to think about, what are some initiatives both in your personal and professional lives that you've been involved in that you're really passionate about? You care deeply about the mission and delivering the outcome of that thing. Think about that. The second is, when have you stepped up and spoken out? So that could be in a situation, in a social situation where you wanted to speak out on someone's behalf. It's a bullying situation, or actually stood up and corrected someone. It could have even been the mispronunciation of your name. When have you stepped up and spoken out? And the last is, or sharing an opinion. When have you influenced the way other people approach things? And you gave a really nice example about Kyla's way of approaching probably data first, and she collects she prioritizes and collects data and does things.
And she observes. She observes dynamics. She builds relationships. She builds trust.
Yeah.
And that means when she has an opinion, and I think the other rule she has that I really like, was it her that has it, or Rachel? A few people I know are really incredible at this, of not doing anything or not asking for anything unless it's serious, because they've basically set the expectation to say to the people around them, I'm happy doing stuff, but if I need help from you, I'll let you know. In a way that means that they've built trust of, like, I will tell you, and when I say this, it's serious, that I've and setting that expectation. So I think
love that.
Those sorts of behaviors, all of them, and each person has different versions of them, or some of them and not others, and different ones. I think they really, when you start to realize how many different types of behavior there is. Yeah,
so many leadership styles and approaches to leading a group of people.
And I would say on those 3, if you haven't already, you should all watch Lessons in Chemistry. Have you seen that show?
No, I haven't.
You really should watch it, because I think she shows all 3 of these things. And this is a chemist who was not allowed to be a chemist because she lived in, 20 years ago or whatever, when women were banned from such things. A bit longer. And ended up on a cooking show. And effectively she thought about cooking as chemistry, and so it was just her approach. I just thought she was such a great example of a leader who shows all 3 of those things, who might, in a field that you wouldn't stereotypically think, oh, woman cooking, like there's so much stigma around that, and like cooking for the house, and her thing was, this is the most important thing. Feeding and nourishing people is leadership, and it is one of the most critical jobs on the planet. And just her approach to all of that, just really, to me, it feels like those 3 points are things she displayed in spades. So it might be a nice example in an area that you wouldn't normally think of, as a leadership.
And I just wanted to pick up on those leadership behaviors and skills as part of this. I didn't do a great job of listing some of those out, but I think, again, when you're trying to collect evidence and overcome that belief, self-limiting belief that you may not be a leader, it's little things like organizing, delegating, communication, learning, empathy, demonstrating passion, accountability, decisiveness, and empowering others. So all of these are leadership behaviors and traits that I've no doubt every single one of our listeners can identify with.
Yeah.
Therefore, you are a leader.
And a lot of those things are like, if you're thinking about even in a meeting, leadership in a meeting could be you've raised your hand and asked a question that no one has the answer to that makes people think differently. That's leadership. That's all it is. Like if you're thinking about tangible evidence, it can be that. Or going away and solving a problem without someone having to ask you and really making someone's life easier. That's leadership. So we're not talking about massive life-changing things. We're talking about all the little things that you might do in a day or a week that show leadership. And if you think about examples at that level, you will find a bunch of them.
Amazing.
Or not.
You will. Check out powersuit.com and learn more about our membership network. We'd love to meet you online and in person in that. And we will catch you next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.